What's up, meta nerds? Today we're going to talk about one of the best things that come out of the prequels, the Droideka. Now, even if you hate episode 1 or the prequels in general, I'm sure your eyes lit up in amazement at the first time these guys rolled down that hallway. I know mine did, and they're still one of my favorite droids in the entire Star Wars universe. So let's take some time to learn a little bit more about these roly-polies of death. The Droideka was invented by a species called the colicoid. Put side by side, you can instantly see the similarities between the colicoid anatomy and the design of the Droideka. The word Droideka itself comes from a combination of the basic word, droid, and the colicoid word eka, which means hireling or drone. Like we see with the super battle droid, the Droideka is made in response in part to how crappy the B-1 is. Now, after the colicoids were set on creating their own droids, they modeled it a lot after themselves. The colicoids were able to curl up into a ball and roll around for quick travel. This was worked into their droid design, and because they're upset at how puny the B-1 is, they added a bunch of blasters and a defensive shield to make this one of the most mobile and deadly forces on the battlefield. Now, like we talked about with some of the other droids that the Separatists end up using, all these cool features means it's going to cost a lot more. How much? 200 times your average B-1 to be exact. Now, the Trade Federation had a clever and kind of comical way to solve this problem. In order to make the droids cheaper, they cut the colicoids a deal on some rare meats from all around the galaxy. Using this method, the CIS was able to augment their B-1s and B-2 battle droids with these new Droidekas, while keeping their colicoid friends happy allies and heavily supplied with the finest Wookiee jerky. Now, their most recognizable feature is their bronzium armor, which is extremely strong, and their personal shield. This shield is amazing at deflecting both energy and projectile-based weapons up to the light artillery class, which means that the basic infantry troop is going to have to call in some backup in order to take these guys out. This shield also negates the ability of Jedi to hit the blaster bolts back to it, which is why we see it strike fear even into Qui-Gon Jinn. But there was a little flaw in the Droideka that Jedi were eventually able to exploit during the Clone Wars. Because its shield generator is located in its legs, it meets at a point on the top of the head, and this point is slightly less strong than the other parts of it, allowing for a Jedi to leap down from above and pierce its armor with their lightsaber. Another interesting feature is that it doesn't use photoreceptors like all the other battle droids. The problem with photoreceptors is that they can easily be distracted in the chaos of battle. The Droideka instead relies upon a radiation sensor to detect its surroundings. The Droidekas were highly successful during the Clone Wars, and thus heavily prized even after the fighting stopped. Many of the remaining units were bought up by corporations, some were bought by the Galactic Empire, and some made it all the way out into wild space where they were used by colonists as perimeter guards. They pop up in a lot of weird places in legends, such as when Gizor Delso tried to hold out against the Empire during the Battle of Mustafar. 6 of them ran security on an entertainment park, and even a Hutt cartel tried to secure some with the assistance of Bossk. One of the most interesting stories involving Droidekas from Legends is when Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade run into one on the outbound flight. Even though this Droideka was decades old at the time they found it, it had been modified so that it could shoot its blasters while rolling, making it very difficult for the pair to take out. And like its B-2 Super Battle Droid cousin, some of the Droidekas even saw combat against the Yuuzhan Vong. Now, like I said, these are one of my favorite droids in all of Star Wars, but they did have some faults. One was an interesting quirk in the shield that meant that if it was pushed too close to any walls or objects, the shield could not differentiate that between some sort of projectile. Meaning by the act of simply bumping up against something, it was draining the shield, and if continued, could overload the Droideka unit. Another flaw is exploited on the Clone Wars TV show by the Resistance fighters on Onderon. They were shown that if you could roll a grenade at just the right speed, it would slip past its shield without being deflected. Now, before we end this video, I definitely want to point out some really cool, interesting facts, behind the scenes kind of stuff. There's actually 3 different types of Droidekas that are used in the films. Admittedly, this lore is probably made up after the fact in order to kind of explain some discrepancies in the prequels. Even though we see how strong the shields are in Episode 1, in Episode 2 we don't see it at all, and only a little bit in Episode 3. To explain this, they had the what's called P-series droid in the first one, which had weaker blasters and slightly less effective shields. In Episode 2, it was supposed to be that they have W-series Droidekas, which have very weak shields in exchange for very strong blasters. And Episode 3 is supposed to have the best one, the Q-series Droideka, which has a really good balance of both shield energy and blaster power. There are also 5 Droideka variants used within the Clone Wars TV show. There was a Grapple Droideka, an Ultra Droideka, which was a larger version, a Droideka that had an ion cannon, a Droideka which worked kind of like a buzzer droid too, and the 5th was a Sniper Droideka. And my favorite behind the scenes fact is that the sound of their blasters was supposed to be similar to the sound of an AT-AT. How cool is that? Well, that's about it for the Droidekas. Let me know what you guys thought about them in your comments below. What was your favorite little factoid? Are they your favorite, or do you somehow hate them? Let me know, and let me know any suggestions for some future videos. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more Star Wars content, and remember, may the Force be with you, always.